Black Ops 2 launched with a huge amount of content, just in terms of the sheer number of new maps, modes, and gameplay features. I want to be careful and make sure that I say it wasn't quantity over quality, because they absolutely weren't just rushing out a bunch of low quality work intentionally. While Tranzit was definitely flawed, behind the scenes they really were trying their best to craft the true next-generation Zombies experience. On the other hand, there was one non-green run launch map, and I think that one did lean a little closer to the side of just filling up space more so than being a genuine attempt at crafting something they were passionate about. Nuketown was definitely primarily a gimmick playing off the popularity of the multiplayer map, but it was fun enough in its own way and stuck around in the zeitgeist long enough to be reimagined in Black Ops 4's Alpha Omega. Part of why it was relevant was that it was seen as a much more digestible, simple alternative to Tranzit, which was a much more frustrating experience and required a lot more investment from the player. What's more interesting though is how far they went in that direction of simplicity and how that gave this map such a singular sense of challenge. The only truly unique thing that Nuketown brought to the table was the perk spawn system. Instead of the machines just existing on the map and being available to you whenever you could make your way to them, you started out with nothing, and then every 3 or 4 rounds, a random perk machine or the Pack-a-Punch would be added to the game. Because you never knew what the next perk would be, or more importantly, where it would land, for the first time since the very first map, Nocturne Toten, when you spawned into a game, you weren't really prompted in any specific direction. You didn't have a singular goal to guide you. There was no power switch to find, no teleporters to link, no lunar landers to fly. Now, you could take this in one of two ways. On one hand, the developers weren't forcing you to go to any one specific location, so you could say that, in other words, they were giving you the freedom to do whatever you wanted and survive in whatever way you chose. On the other hand, the community and the mode had grown out of that bare-bones design of Nocturne Toten a long time ago. Players were starting to have an expectation of a more engaging gameplay progression, as well as a sense of agency, instead of just being at the whim of the map and having to wait for it to allow you to progress. Where Shinonuma's random perk spawns were kind of similar in that you couldn't control when you got the perk you wanted, the only limiter there was points. You as a player could be economical with your spending, you could optimize your point building. You always felt that it was in your power to improve. You could always do better on the next run, even if the randomness of the map didn't cooperate. Nuketown's perks were locked behind time instead of points, and time isn't really a variable the player has control over. You'll have everything you need by about round 20, but that last one you get might be Juggernog or Pack-a-Punch, making it so that entire time leading up to that you have to survive a lot weaker than you're used to. It's completely random, so there's nothing you can actively do to set yourself up for success. You just have to do your best to survive and hope that the RNG is on your side for the next random perk drop. In a way, that's actually the appeal of the map. It doesn't ask you to complete any quests or be absolutely perfect with your point or ammo management. It was more just a pure test of your survival skills. If you killed enough zombies to progress through the rounds enough to get to the next perk drop, you pretty much by default would have enough to buy it, so that was your only goal, just stay alive by any means necessary. It's pure in that way. Zombies has borrowed elements from the roguelike genre in the past, but this is the closest they ever got to fully emulating that design. Like a true roguelike, it tests your fundamental skills at the game by changing different variables and seeing how you do in different situations with both advantages and disadvantages. If you can consistently do well on Nuketown, you know that you're not taking any shortcuts, and you do really have a fundamental baseline level of skill at the core game loop of the mode. To make the map into this minimalistic test of skill though, they had to gut a lot of the things that the mode had built up over time. Like all of the other survival sub-maps, there were no buildables on Nuketown. There was also no Tombstone Soda. For all intents and purposes, this could have been a Black Ops 1 map. None of the new features that were introduced in this game as part of the next generation of zombies were present. Even more than that though, in a lot of ways it regressed back even further all the way to the World at War era. For one, none of the Black Ops 1 perks were there either, like PhD Flopper or Stamina Up. The only ones that were there were the original Verrucht 4, with Double Tap being 2.0, but other than that, no change. Beyond that, it was also that halfway through Black Ops 1's life cycle, it started to feel like the possibilities for maps had opened up, and they didn't all have to take place in destroyed, grungy ruins. Shangri-La and Moon felt like they were the start of a new era where every map was going to take place in a new, visually interesting, very unique location. Tranzit did go back to a more mundane, familiar setting, but I do give it credit for the sheer apocalyptic scale of it all, which we hadn't really seen before. Nuketown, though, was undeniably a regression back to that World at War style in every way. Exactly like those early entries in the series, it was just a multiplayer map that they threw some debris and rocks around and then dirtied up a little bit to make it look a bit more destroyed. It was very obviously designed for multiplayer first and foremost, with it being almost perfectly symmetrical, well balanced for two teams of PvP, but lacking that interesting variety of areas and that real sense of progression and story told through the environment. They also didn't add any interesting mobility options to make the map interconnected in the way that we had started to take as a given for Zombies map design. The gimmick of it all clearly came first, and they never really managed to give it a unique identity just for Zombies. It never pretended to be anything more, it was always advertised as just a bonus released alongside the most ambitious map ever with Tranzit, but looking at it as an entry in the long series of Zombies maps, it is kind of disappointing to see development stagnate for a second there. Black Ops 1's 5 was kind of in a similar position of being a lower investment map, in that case secondary to Kino der Toten, and it was mostly built out of campaign assets, but it still managed to innovate in its own way and bring a couple things to the table, and really find its own identity in a way that I don't think Nuketown ever did. Again, that's not to say that it isn't enjoyable to play. When you're not being so analytical and you're just playing the map, it's a good opportunity for some low investment fun, and that way that it was a bare bones test of skill was a valuable addition to this game. They also managed to make the most out of it and inject some personality by setting it 10 years before the events of Tranzit, right when our original characters were fighting their way through Moon. As you progress through the rounds, you'll hear Richtofen's voice over the radio completing various steps of the Moon Easter egg, and then at round 25, you'll see the zombie's eyes change color from yellow to blue, showing that we're seeing him take control of the ether in real time. Finally, at the end of the game, right as the zombies are killing the players, the rockets land and start the apocalypse that we see in Tranzit. It helped to bridge the gap between Black Ops 1 and Black Ops 2, Moon, and Tranzit by being able to see that same event from our new on-Earth perspective. In that same vein were a couple of smaller Easter eggs, like being able to hear the bus leave for Hanford where we would find it in Green Run 10 years later, or being able to hear Marlton, one of the new Victus characters, hiding out in a bunker on this map, which is where he survived the rockets. It really wasn't much, it was mostly just showing a story that we'd already seen and there weren't any gameplay implications, but it was a nice way to try to bring it into the fold of the Zombies universe when it was so disconnected and out of touch in all those other ways. And that's really all there is to say about Nuketown. It was an entertaining little side project, but when you zoom out and look at the full scope of the history of Call of Duty Zombies development, it didn't really innovate or make any real splash in any way. When the novelty of playing on the iconic Nuketown wears off, you're left with a map that feels like it could have been released at any point over the last 4 years and fit in just as well. Laid out on the timeline, it pales in comparison to some of its contemporaries, but at the same time, it did what it needed to do, which was be a simple map that was fun to play, and tried to keep things feeling fresh despite, and sometimes because of, its limited resources.